When it comes to the man Terry Bollea and his controversies, I do not defend them. But when it comes to what the man did as Hulk Hogan in contributing to professional wrestling, I cannot deny that. I have a saying in life which goes like, bad behaviors do not take away good talent, but good talent does not justify bad behaviors. And I think that's exactly what you can use when it comes to one Hulk Hogan, known also by his real name, Terry Bollea. Look, the controversies of Terry Bollea can never be defended, but they will never take away his contributions as Hulk Hogan to the professional wrestling industry. Likewise, Hulk Hogan's contributions to professional wrestling will not excuse his controversies as Terry Bollea. I'm SonGoshuaku, and I'm a lifelong professional wrestling fan, and I'll be the host of this video. And for me to say lifelong wrestling fan, that would not be possible if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan. I didn't grow up as a 1980s kid. I was born 1990, so I came after Hulk Hogan, and as a result, I didn't have much emotional connection to Hulk Hogan. I got into WWE around 1994, the New Generation era. So the wrestlers that I grew up with was Bret the Hitman Hart, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, and then when I really got hooked on professional wrestling during the Attitude Era, Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. Those were the wrestlers that made me a lifelong wrestling fan. But it all goes back to Hulk Hogan, because none of those guys I just mentioned, they're not there in the 90s for me to become a big wrestling fan if Hulk Hogan didn't do what he did in the 1980s. And for that, I will always respect what Hulk Hogan did for professional wrestling. Going back, watching some of his stuff in the 1980s, man, Hulk Hogan, he was one of the greatest charismatic superstars of all time. He was a master of psychology. So, a lot of people didn't like him because of his matches. He had a very simple formula, get beat down, Hulk up, and, do the, what you gotta do, brother, when the Hulkster runs wild on you. And, do the big punches, the big boot, the leg drop, which really did a number on his lower back, to the point where I think he was getting, by the end of his life, he was getting he was getting some of the nerves cut just so he could relieve some of the pain. And I saw some of his stuff in Japan, highlights of some of his matches in Japan, where he really showcased that he could definitely do, some good basic wrestling, chain wrestling and all that stuff, because he knew what the audience wanted in Japan. He knew they wanted more of the technical wrestling, and he gave them more of the technical wrestling, versus in America, they wanted the more flashy stuff, and that's what Hogan did to him. Man, you go back to some of those WrestleManias, because I have gone back recent years and watch like all the WrestleManias, so I could watch like the 80s, and man, wrestling wise, Hulk Hogan, back in the 80s, you look at the Iron Sheik, and even before that, he was in Rocky 3. Rocky, one of my favorite movie franchises of all time. I think he was Thunder Lips and stuff, so that was really cool to see. Going back into those 1980s matches, though, him and Mr. T teaming up, huge, phenomenal business. I mean, just because of him being in there with Mr. T, that was such a big success at WrestleMania. And then look at where we are now. We just had WrestleMania 41 going into WrestleMania 42 next year. Not possible without Hulk Hogan. WrestleMania 2, King Kong Bundy. Then WrestleMania 3, the most legendary pro wrestling moment of all time, slamming Andre the Giant, which was not the first time he slammed Andre the Giant, but it's the most legendary one. And that was like a big wave. Like, if you love WrestleMania matches where it's like that big fight feel, as Gorilla Monsoon, legendary commentator, once said, who's no longer with us as well, the irremovable object meeting the irresistible force, and stuff. That was like the first big one-on-one, two big superstar attractions meeting and colliding, and that's what WrestleMania would get built off of. My all-time favorite match is Stone Cold and The Rock and everything and stuff like that. So things like that, of that nature, man. I just think is absolutely phenomenal. I really enjoyed that and stuff like that for that match, and it wasn't the best technical wrestling masterpiece, I have to admit, and all that stuff. Certainly it's not going to go down as that, but it was an all-time great moment. WrestleMania 4 with Macho Man Randy Savage. Ooh, yeah, you got lust in your eyes for Elizabeth. Man, one of the greatest stories WWE's ever told. Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Miss Elizabeth, and that match is probably one of my favorite all-time Hogan matches. Love that match between him and Randy Savage at WrestleMania 5, I think it was. Yeah, after WrestleMania 4, and then don't forget WrestleMania 6, when Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan collided. Obviously, it wasn't much of a technical masterpiece, but the audience was wild for that, and that match really helped inspire Edge, and we got him in WWE and Adam Copeland. So phenomenal stuff. When I go back and watch some of those 1980s and just see the roar in the crowd and everything, it's just huge. And that 1980s period did so much for WWE. It put WWE on the map as a worldwide global phenomenon, and it helped bring the business to where it would be able to have another boom period in the Attitude Era and get to where we are now. So yeah, Hogan absolutely did huge stuff for that 80s period. And like I said, I grew up in the 90s, so my introduction to Hulk Hogan was actually through the WrestleMania Super video game for Sega Genesis. That was my introduction to Hulk Hogan, and man, it was one of those things where that was my first time wrestling, and my brother, he was introducing me to wrestling through that game. And I remember not just that game, but seeing Hogan in like Nanny, was it Nanny or something? I forget the movie's name. I know he's in Suburban Commando. That was my first introduction like to Hulk Hogan, and also I know seeing Ultimate Warrior in that Super WrestleMania game. So those 90s stars, it was cool to see them, and so I kind of knew who they were, and that just shows you the impact they had. Even a little kid at my age, 4 or 5 years old, knowing who they were. I used to mispronounce his name and call him Pogan. I didn't know how to pronounce it. I had a very kid mindset, obviously, watching at the time. I was watching WWE off and on during the mid 90s, so I didn't really see the initial NWO stuff. I just remember my father at the time, who was trying to figure out what the heck wrestling was. He would always say stuff like, we would turn to WWF Raw, and he's like, oh, this is the phony stuff. He said turn the other one look real, and it'd be the NWO, and they have Dennis Robin on there, and they'd be like, oh snap, they got Dennis Robin, Karl Malone, all that stuff on there, and I didn't know why my father felt that way. He's learned more about the business now and everything, but when I watched those Monday Night War areas, that's when I realized, it's like, oh, that's what was going on. People would tune in and they see WWF look too cartoony, and they see WCW, Scott Hall, Nash, Hogan. They were all looking like it was like some real type stuff going on there, and it changed the business. The NWO, I even though I didn't see it in real time, going back, I've watched it so many times. This right here, brother, is the new world order of professional wrestling. And he's like, you fans can go ahead and stick it, brother. All that stuff, whatever. I'm just paraphrasing there, but yeah, man, iconic classic moment, the NWO. Dun, 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 dun. Him coming out the Voodoo Child. Fantastic stuff, man. That the NWO was the stuff. I got the NWO shirt, and led to the Wolf Pack, which, I always saw that. So, NWO for life, and that paved the way for D-Generation X, paved the way for a more edgier WWE and Attitude Era. So even though, like I said, I had no emotional connection with Hogan, and I kind of went back and watched all that stuff. Looking back, I have to really enjoy, because without Hogan as a babyface and a heel doing what he did in the 80s and 90s, and just creating two boom periods and reinventing himself like that as a face, once as a face in the 80s and once as a heel in the 90s, by him doing that, man, phenomenal that he was able to go on and really, when you think about it, he was able to go on and do that to the business and reinvent it, and it lead to the ways of the stuff that my generation really grew up liking and stuff. As a kid, when he came back to WCW, or he came back to WWE, the thing is, I was like, who's this old guy coming in here trying to steal Rock's thunder? And I saw the WrestleMania, at the time it was like WrestleMania 1 to 14 VHS tape that they they had back then in the 90s. That's how we watched our videos back then, for you guys that are younger out there that only know about streaming. But yeah, I knew Hogan was a big deal, but Rock and Austin were my guys and stuff. But I will say, though, when it comes to The Rock versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18, looking back at it, even from a more mature eyes, even as a kid, I thought like, oh wow, the energy is awesome and everything. But even looking back at it through my teen years and adult years, phenomenal. It's an amazing match. It just really shows you the power of two superstars when the audience is fully invested, how you don't have to do a lot to completely hook the audience. So awesome match, and his match with Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 19, phenomenal. And it is a shame that we never got Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Hulk Hogan, the two biggest names to really help put WWE where it was. So it's unfortunate that we didn't get that and everything. So, but that would have been awesome, I think, certainly to have. And I did not like Triple H losing at Backlash to him. I thought the stuff that Undertaker did, like tying him by his feet and driving him through the arena, was good stuff. And the Hulk rules again, him tapping out the Kurt Angle, putting him over. That was fun stuff. So I did really enjoy the 2002 run with Hogan, and him putting over Brock Lesnar, where Brock Lesnar squeezing him and it squeezes the life out of the Hulkster. The Vince McMahon match though was cool, and I did like the whole him coming out to Voodoo Child and everything, and seeing him come back for his Hall of Fame speech. It was good to see there. And it was around his Hall of Fame speech that as a teenager I really started appreciating Hulk Hogan more, because of what Hulk Hogan did. That's when I was realizing, because I was a lifelong fan. Rock and Austin had retired at this point, but I had loved wrestling so much, I wanted to learn more about the history of wrestling. So I was going back watching that stuff from the 80s and stuff, and seeing just how big a deal Hogan was. So I was going crazy when he would come out and everything. And hey, it was really cool to see him come back at WrestleMania 21, Eugene, and help Eugene out. And he did where he teamed up with him, I think, and stuff like that, and teamed up with Shawn Michaels. That would eventually lead to the match with him and Shawn Michaels at 2005. Hey, we even got that moment where he got to do the pose off with John Cena and Shawn Michaels and everything were posing together. So yeah, that was really cool stuff too as well. Him and Shawn Michaels, obviously great feud, especially Shawn Michaels, when he was doing like a brother, talking about on Larry King, doing the Larry King parody, so I enjoyed the feud, the match. Shawn oversold like crazy for that match, and I actually watched that match years later, and I thought, oh, it was going to be one of the all-time great, seeing Hogan and Shawn Michaels. I brought it on DVD and didn't watch it until years later, and I was like, oh, that's what he did. He was overselling. That's why people were talking about it. He didn't put Randy Orton over, so yeah, I mean, I didn't know about that. And then I saw his run in TNA, which actually, hey, the Sting match, obviously the classic build-up in WCW was great, but then the finish of that match, yeah, I thought the match with him and Sting, which was his final televised match, was good stuff in TNA, so I did enjoy that. Yeah, and Hogan was always one of those around. And one thing that was really cool, I would say, about Hulk Hogan is, and I mentioned this in my video, as you guys can tell, I'm a Dragon Ball fan. But yeah, one of the things I mentioned in my tribute video about Akira Toriyama, I was saying how sometimes when people die, you hear all this great stuff about them. And and sometimes that'll lead to people saying, well, you said this stuff now, but where was that when they were living? And when you look at Hogan, WWE, for the most part, when Hogan was never a part of the competition, whether it be TNA wrestling or, when he obviously, WWE let him go, because of the controversy and stuff with the racist rant that got leaked. For the most part, whenever Hogan was in good standing with WWE always went out of their way to make sure they highlight Hulk Hogan. So no matter what generation you grew up watching, Hogan was always a big deal. He was always using highlight packages, always talked about how big a deal WrestleMania was. So it was really cool that Hogan in his lifetime, I think, was able to see his work get celebrated constantly. I mean, how many times has him slamming Andre the Giant been played over? So, Hogan was always there. And so I think that was really cool. I think he wrestled his last match, non-televised event, and then his body just broke down after that. They were going to try to bring him back for WrestleMania 37, I think it was, but the pandemic kind of put that down. So when you look at the career, man, phenomenal career, one of the greatest of all time. Hulk Hogan certainly deserves and has earned to be on the Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling. But then there's the controversies. And on a personal level, when it comes to Hulk Hogan, and I don't know him personally, but based on what we've seen of him in the public eye and what others have said, the stories have come out about him being a backstage politician, him really being super protective of his spot, to the point where, they had to do the whole thing at Bash at the Beach and with the whole thing with him and Russo, which at least did lead to Booker T getting the WCW championship. You had the way he left TNA, how they had Dixie Carter on her legs, basically begging Hogan not to go away. Of course, when it came to the whole backstage politician stuff, that's where the famous meme quotes came, "That doesn't work for me, brother," came from, and stuff like that. So that we've often hear about when it came to his politician or politicking when it came to pro wrestling and stuff like that. And like I said, I wasn't backstage. We can only go based on what other wrestlers had said, but I will say I do find the memes funny, though. So yeah, you had those, and then of course, you had the controversies with, like, his son Nick was in that car incident that left his friend paralyzed, and I think he once said that God had placed some heavy stuff on that on the kid, and that poor kid, that guy is paralyzed for life. I know there was the controversy where when his son Nick was in jail, where they're talking, in between the glass, and he's making casual comments a few years before when that leaked audio would eventually happen. So this is beforehand, where he was, I think he was pronouncing it like Blizzak guys or something like that, and apparently he was referring to black people and everything. So it's like when you hear him casually make stuff like that and then realize a few years later that audio got leaked, there would be people who would start to wonder, oh, is this how he's always been? Whenever he thinks he's not being recorded and he's just being casual, then he's up here making jokes and stuff about that and everything, where I think he didn't want to get like resurrected, as like he called it, Blizzak guys or something like that. So yeah, you just never know, when, where the sincerity fell, or where it was when it came to that type of stuff with Hulk Hogan. He had the racist rant where he didn't like that he wanted his daughter to date a guy who was going to be very successful in doing something in his life, which from a standpoint of guy, just saying a guy, I think any parent would want their child when they grow up to obviously be with somebody that truly cares for them and doing something with their life. But notice I said the keyword guy. I'm not bringing race into it. Hogan, unfortunately, brought race into it. And I know a lot of people will bring up about how in the audio himself, he says that he is kind of racist and he's racist to a point, and stuff like that. And that was by his own self-admission. Once again, how far of that actually is Hulk Hogan? How much did he change since that time? Or then you look and see what he did years later, and then the apologies. It's just really hard to tell where it falls with Hogan. So, and yeah, he was probably in a really bad spot in his life at the time, and everything. And they recorded against his will and stuff, like they recorded without his knowledge there, and leaked his privacy. And he won that case against Gawker. But the biggest controversy that came in there is, I don't think it was ever so much Hogan said that. It was more so, well, did Hogan learn from that? And did he sincerely apologize? Now, he said he has apologized, but according to what a lot of the WWE stars, if you look at what Shelton Benjamin said, Shelton Benjamin was saying that Hogan lost him because Hogan sounded more like he was sorry that he got caught versus sorry that it happened. And when you look at something like that, I think that was the controversy there. A lot of people felt Hogan wasn't sincere. Mark Henry tried his best to try and get Terry Bollea, like, hey, go around like black schools, black communities, and just educating people the wrongfulness, and he felt of saying stuff like that, and Hogan felt it wasn't. And then you hear more controversies with like his family, like his daughter Brooke. They said had become very distant from her, and there's stories that she got taken off the wheel and all that stuff. So and then you've seen what she's rolling the controversy. You've seen what his ex-wife has rolling on the controversies there. So when you hear what his own family, and then you had like his best friend had a falling out, Brutus Beefcake and stuff like that. it's just, yeah. Hogan, I think maybe it's possible that maybe he just didn't mature to understand what he was saying. Was just very ignorant about it. And then in last year, I think, he said he made fun of Kamala Harris heritage and stuff, and he said, oh, that's gonna be, the booze, that was the booze talking, brother, I'm gonna get heat for that one, and to do that, something like that after 9 years. And Hogan had so many lies and stories, so it was hard to tell where it ended with him, when it came to the man Terry Bollea. And like some of his lies, like I think he told the story about the kid was dying, and his last request was to see Hogan compete at SummerSlam 1992, and Hogan said he won the match at SummerSlam 1992, and he looked over and the kid had already passed away. Except Hogan wasn't even on SummerSlam 1992. He said something recently that he had Brock Lesnar's comeback match in 2012, which is funny because I was there in 2012 in the Allstate Arena at Extreme Rules, and pretty much all that was John Cena. He said something about he worked 400 days in a year. Like, Hogan just, man, he had so many exaggerated stories, which were funny and entertaining stories. But when you say stuff like that, you can laugh at stuff like that, but then when it comes to like the racist rants, going back to what I said, any father obviously wants his daughter to be with a guy that's going successful, but you don't have to bring race into it like he did, and that's what he did. And when he's saying sorry and you're hearing all this stuff, it just gets hard to know, like, okay, is he sincere here, is he not sincere here? And even more complicated, just like Cody Rhodes said, because he did have Hogan did have, black friends in the industry. You've heard Jimmy Hart said he did, who's definitely a very loyal friend to Hogan. Jimmy Hart, he was loyal to him, but Jimmy Hart was saying how he really helped out Coco Beware, and he went to bat for Kamala, and he was very good friends with Mr. T, very good friends with Dennis Robbins, and so even Mike Tyson was saying he felt that Hogan possibly could, maybe could, or maybe couldn't, but he said he felt like Hogan maybe just he said something in a very bad moment where he wasn't thinking right, and that's not representation of who he is. And I never heard any of the people that were really close black friends of Hogan having issue with him. Never heard him having any issue. He was very good to his fans from what I've heard, and never heard him having any issues with any black fans and everything, in terms of how he treated them and stuff like that. So like I said, it's possible at his core, Hogan was not an evil person. I don't put him on the level of this evil, malicious person, but he said things that I felt like he was just very ignorant about and not understanding. Like, yeah, you can't go around making fun of the culture like that, like he did when he was talking about something with Kamala Harris in the bar. Like, yeah, you can't go around saying stuff like that. And if you did, you have to understand the severity of and why wrong that was, and apologize why, hey, we got to let people know this is not the way to do it. But he didn't, he's like, instead, I guess they were saying, he was like, be careful, there's cameras everywhere, and you want to be careful when you're being recorded and stuff. So yeah, it gets really mucky. It does with Hulk Hogan when it comes to Terry Bollea and stuff. And I've seen some other content creators who were fans of Hulk Hogan, and they were talking about how they feel that, man, this should be a celebration of what he did for professional wrestling. But instead, you have to acknowledge the good and also look at the bad in his life and everything and stuff like that. So yeah, it gets really complicated, honestly. They say he was a born-again Christian and everything and stuff. So hey, only God knows Hulk's heart and everything, and I hope for Hulk's sake he was saved, especially in his last moments. But at the end of the day, like I said, in conclusion with this, I can't blame people if they look at Hogan. They can't look at Hogan the same way. And I can also understand that there are people who still would love to praise his wrestling work. So as I mentioned before, in Cody Rhodes said, it is complicated. So that's why I've constantly been saying through this whole video, can't defend the controversies of Terry Bollea, but I can certainly praise the contributions of Hulk Hogan to pro wrestling. But overall, I really do hope for his sake that he was able to be sincere with his apologies, and in the end, and hopefully went out there, and hopefully he was saved. And most definitely, my heart and prayers go out to his family. Like I said, I know he had issues, obviously, from his daughter and all that stuff, but the people that loved him and were friends or even former best friends. Bruce Beefcake said he wished that they would have been able to make amends before he passed away. So that's always a good reminder in life. If you're on the outs with somebody, make up with them before it's too late and everything, and stuff that. Always make sure you tell the people in your life that you love them, because you never know. And it's complicated, like when it comes to them. That's why I have to conclude there. I'm not going to defend the controversies, but I will respect the contributions that he made to pro wrestling. It goes back to what my stepfather raised me with. He always told me, get caught up in the message, not the messenger. And I think that goes, another saying I've heard is, get lost in the art, not the artist. And I think that's something for people to remind everybody, is that, we can love and respect a lot of people out there for their work and everything, but don't get so caught up into the person and stuff like that. And it's not to say that, no, by all means, not everybody out there that does work is bad. You want to believe that, oh man, they're so great at doing this type of work and they must be even just as good of a person or even better. But no, don't get caught up into that and everything. So overall, I just wanted to go ahead and give my thoughts on the very complicated legacy of Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea. Like I said, I'm not going to defend his controversies at all, but I will always respect what he did for the professional wrestling industry, and that can never be taken away. Hulk Hogan is the reason why pro wrestling is where it is today. As a long life pro wrestling fan who have bonded with friends and family, I have moments of watching wrestling that I will cherish forever with my family and friends, and that's definitely thanks to Hulk Hogan doing what he did back in the 1980s and everything.